From Mountain Home to Raft River, we've got all the District 4 analysis you'll need to know. This is the Magic Valley Prepcast with Scott Burton.
That's right. It's another edition of the Magic Valley Prepcast from IdahoSports.com, talking about everything District 4 athletics in the state of Idaho. I'm Brandon Bainey, joined by the guy who was probably celebrating his Dodgers clinching a playoff spot last night, Scott Burton.
That's right, and also a big Ram win against the Bears on Sunday night, so life is good.
Life is good, for sure. So we're going to talk about a full slate of football games that happened in the Magic Valley this past week. A lot of good, exciting games. I kind of wanted to talk first, though, Scott, a little bit of volleyball because Jerome High School hosted the Jerome Invitational this past weekend, and there was a ton of Magic Valley teams there. A couple of teams from the Treasure Valley came over as well, and it sounds like it was another fantastic tournament this year.
Oh, it was. I mean, anytime these teams can just play all day long and just get that valuable experience, it's going to pay dividends for them down the road. And, you know, we had a pretty good mix of not just geographical places. You know, Magic Valley had a bunch of teams. Treasure Valley sent down a few teams as well, but we had it up and down the gamut of, you know, from capital to valley, you know. So, I mean, it wasn't just strictly a 4A. I mean, it was really good for these little schools to get in and see some really good competition. It's only going to make them better, but it went incredibly well.
Yeah, Wood River ended up winning the tournament. They went 4-0 in pool play, I think, and then they played Gooding. Gooding won their bracket or their pool, and Wood River won theirs, and Wood River beat Gooding in the championship match as well. Which team stood out to you the most that you saw?
Well, you know, obviously Wood River, because they won it, and they're ranked, number 2 in the state in the 4A volleyball pool. So, I mean, they've got a solid team. I mean, Wood River, when Wood River plays well, they just don't make a lot of mistakes. I mean, they've got some girls that can swing, but defensively, they get to everything. You know, the ball doesn't fall on the floor very much against that defensive Wood River. So, I mean, they're just solid. But, you know, Gooding stood out to me a little bit because they rolled through their side of the bracket. I mean, it's a 3A school, and they were hanging. You know, they got swept by Wood River in the championship match, but it wasn't like they were laying down. I mean, it was 25-18, 25-17, whatever it was. But they battled. They got some kids that can swing and do a really nice job. So, you know, I would expect Gooding to make a little bit of noise in the 3A.
Yeah, that's exciting because we talk about Filer obviously has a really good team, and Kimberly is pretty solid. And if you can add a third team in Gooding to the mix, I think that league could be really fun to watch.
Oh, that league is incredible. I mean, we had all 3 of those teams at the tournament, and they were 3 of the better teams. You know, I mean, it's just amazing the battles that conference is going to have with Kimberly, Filer, and Gooding in the mix in volleyball. It was fun to watch.
Yeah, and of course, the big game on the schedule I noticed this week in the Great Basin Conference for volleyball, Wood River at Burley Thursday night. We might find out once and for all who's going to be in the driver's seat in this conference.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be definitely kind of jockeying for position in the conference as far as that goes. And, you know, Twin is kind of flying under the radar a little bit. You know, Wood River's making all the noise, but Twin is pretty dang good, and I'd watch out for them as well. But that Burley Wood River match is going to be fun.
Yeah, that'll be Thursday night in Burley. So some volleyball talk to start off the Prepcast today, but let's transition now to football. And we always kind of just work our way from the top, right? Those 4A schools down to 1A. The best game of the weekend came at the 2A level, but we'll get to that in just a second. Let's start at the top. Let's start at the top with the 4A Great Basin Conference. We talked about the annual rivalry game between Twin Falls and Canyon Ridge. Bruins really flexed their muscles in a 48-6 victory.
Yeah, Twin Falls has got a lot of skilled kids. I mean, they can put some points on the board. You know, they've got some speed, they've got some size, they've got some strength, they've got a little bit of depth too, and that seems to be something that a lot of these schools are struggling with is depth. Meanwhile, Canyon Ridge, you know, new coach, new system, new everything. It's just going to take them a while to kind of get it going. You know, we kind of looked at this game on paper and realized, you know, this is probably what the score was going to be. and it just kind of went chalk like it was supposed to. But it was the Service Bowl, and got a lot of good feedback from people that were there. It's the Service Bowl. We talked about it last week, and they did some really good things in honoring our servicemen and women and our first responders. And so I know that there's a lot of pride in that game, but walking away from those kind of games, you learn that there are some things that are bigger than football, and that is kind of the whole point of the Service Bowl. But at the end of the day, there was a football game, and Twin did what they were supposed to do, and that was beat up on Canyon Ridge. Yeah,
and I did see the uniforms from this year's Service Bowl. They looked awesome as always, the red, white, and blue styled uniforms. So the other conference game that took place Friday night featured Burley and Wood River, and these were two of those teams that have played a lot of conference games kind of early on in the season, and this was another separation game. It ended up being a pretty good one, and Burley hangs on to win 27-20.
Yeah, these middle teams in the conference, projected middle teams in the conference, and I shouldn't say that that's where they're at, because by the standings, Burley and Wood River are both ahead of Jerome right now. But they're the ones that you kind of have to watch out for, because they're still trying to get their selves identified. They're trying to figure out, kind of who they are. We knew that Burley was going to be able to put up points this year, or at least they could score. Wood River was the big question mark. What were they going to be able to do? Because, they just are in these dogfights, these physical grudge matches. And so, this Burley Wood River game was going to be very important for the standings. And we thought it might be close. And it was 27-20 Burley.
So Burley is a team that's making a little bit of noise. Wood River, I still think, is as a team that if the growth of their program hadn't been stunted last year by not playing any games, essentially, I think they could be even in an even better spot. I really like their coach, Shane Carden. He's a younger coach, but played college quarterback at Eastern Carolina University at the Division I level. I think he is getting Wood River on the right path. That's just consistently now week in, week out, trying to find ways to win. So that was a fun game to watch. You talked about Jerome. They had a non-conference game. They traveled to Shelley, and I'll tell you that was a game I was at broadcasting for IdahoSports.com. Shelley is good this year. Man, they're just good.
Yeah, Shelley's really good. And great job, by the way. I did listen and gave you some major props, so well done.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, Shelley's really, really good. I mean, they are good for a football team, and they are ranked in the top 5 in the latest media poll. But, you got to put some things in perspective on that. They started absolutely red hot. Jerome was without their starting quarterback, so they went with number 2, and Jerome dug themselves a hole right out of the gate. I mean, first play from scrimmage interception. They gave up 2 special teams touchdowns, and it was 21-0 before you could blink. And then after that, it was cruise control. But Riker Klinger for Shelley, quite a football player. He carried 12 times, 80 yards, scored 3 touchdowns. They are a really, really good football team, and I'd be interested to see how far they go in this 4A division. But Jerome has played 3 solid non-conference games in Gooding, in Kimberly, and now Shelley, getting ready for the Battle of the Bridge this coming Friday against Twin Falls. So we'll see what that non-conference schedule, does for them. But hats off to Shelley. Boy, they from top to bottom, freshmen, sophomores, and varsity, they're solid.
Yeah, on the East Idaho Prepcast with Lance Taylor, he and I were kind of looking at Shelley's schedule, and it's kind of setting up now to where they're playing in the softer portion. They could be like 6-0 pretty easily by the time we get to like October, and so that'll be interesting to watch for Shelley. Yeah, for Jerome, you talked about Daniel Gill is normally the quarterback. He wasn't there, so Xander Bingham started, and you could tell just a little bit off early on in the passing game. He really settled in as the game got into the second half. Early on, Jerome lined up Gavin Capps in the backfield and gave him the ball on a couple of carries. And I thought, well, okay, makes sense. They're going to modify their game plan. Capps is probably their best skill player, and they need to find a way to get the ball into his hands. But then they really got away from that after those first couple of drives. But
yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, last year we had an established quarterback, an all-state receiver, and then you put Gavin Capps in the mix, who can run right up the seam when you're paying attention to what's going on the outside with Jerome's receiving court last year. You take all of that away, and on the skill side of things, you've got a bunch of young kids and Gavin. So you've got to find a way to get him the football because he's your playmaker. And, and I think Jerome just kind of got punched in the mouth early, and it just changed everything. I mean, you were there. You could analyze this game better than I could, but, they're going to have to get that figured out. And, having the quarterback position sort of in flux doesn't help things.
Yeah, and then defensively as well, Shelley was able to bust off a lot of big runs. Some of that was because of missed tackles by Jerome. So I think if they can clean up the missed tackles defensively, their defensive line, I was really impressed by Jerome's defensive line. They got a big guy at nose guard. They got some Caps at one D end and Blair at the other one. And so I was really impressed with Jerome's D line. If they can just tackle at the second level, I think they're going to be in a much better position. So
yeah, I mean, their D lines are strength. I mean, like you said, Caps and Blair and Foster and those guys are just big bodies in there. But what's going to catch up to Jerome and what's been catching up to them is their depth. They just don't have anybody to spell these kids, And so if those kids are on the field for very long, you're going to see the problems, and that is that they're just not going to have the gas in the tank in the second half. And you see it by kind of mid-third quarter, towards the end of the third quarter. It's like, okay, we're done. We've got nothing and no subs to come in for us. So that's been their struggle so far, and it's going to continue to be their struggle. So they're going to have to manage the game a little bit, to balance, their offense and defense a little bit, because you can't leave the defense on the field, which means the offense can't make mistakes and turn the ball over. So, I mean, it's a yin and a yang, and when you don't have the depth, you got to figure it out some other way.
Yeah, you have to play almost a perfect game when you don't have the numbers of other programs to stay in it. So let's talk about Mountain Home was the other Great Basin Conference team. They were playing Gooding, and Gooding won 48-13. I'm not surprised that Gooding won. I'm surprised by how much they won by. So is Gooding better than we thought? Is Mountain Home not as good as we thought, or is it somewhere in the middle?
Well, I think, going into this game, head coach Cameron Anderson, he challenged his team, and he just said, we need to be more physical. We need to finish plays. Those are our two focal points. And they did, and it didn't help Mountain Home that they fumbled on their first play from scrimmage, and Gooding scored 3 plays later. So like right out of the gate, Mountain Home's against the 8 ball there. And, Gooding held Mountain Home to 19 carries, 50 yards rushing, and that was it. 76 yards passing. So there just wasn't a whole lot of offense from Mountain Home. And that was done up front by Gooding, because the challenge that they were given was to control the line of scrimmage. Because the big talk about Mountain Home was, what are they going to do with Clark? And, how are they going to handle him? And, and they had an interesting game plan for him, because, one of the things that Gooding did offensively is they ran a lot of veer. And so they pretty much just let Clark take his aggression right up the field and then make a decision. So they didn't have to block him. If he took this guy, well, they went this way. They took that guy, they gave it to the inside. I mean, so it was an interesting little game plan that kind of, got Clark out of his element, and the rest of the way, Gooding was able to match up with them and control the line of scrimmage. They had some really good plays from, let's see, what do I got here? Oh, Tate Gillette, 10 tackles, 3 sacks, a blocked field goal, a strip fumble, So, I mean, it was a really good defensive output for Gooding.
Yeah, and of course they're 3-0 now and looking really solid. Continuing in the 3A SCIC, probably the game of the weekend in the entire state, let alone just District 4. What a battle at overtime between Declo and Kimberly. The Hornets sneak away with a 41-40 win in overtime. That was a wild finish.
Oh, my word, was it ever. And talk about an emotional game for both of these teams, because both of these teams had it won, both of these teams had it lost, and at the end of the day, you go to overtime, and Declo comes away with a 1-point win, because there were two contrasting styles. Kimberly is got the spread offense and the the zone running game, and the shotgun wing tee for Declo. So I mean, you've got these two contrasting styles of defense. And Declo played it just like everybody else does. They just kind of lay off defensively and don't give up the big play. And if they can keep the ball in front of them, they're going to give up chunks of yardage, and then they rally to the football, and that's how they played it. But, that's going to produce points for Kimberly. But, the turnovers came back and got Kimberly in the end, or let Kimberly back in it, because Declo was up 2 scores. She started turning the ball over, and towards the end of the game, into regulation, Kimberly drives the field, down by 6, scores, has an extra point to win it, and they miss the extra point, and we go to overtime. And so Kimberly scores, decides to go for 2 because of what happened at the end of regulation. Didn't get it. And then on the first play in overtime for Declo, they scored and kicked the extra point and won it. So, you talk about the pendulum swinging back and forth in that game. It was crazy. The 2 running backs for Declo are just absolute beasts. So we're talking about Ramsey and Matthews. They just are playing so well. So a few stats from the game: Kimberly, 463 total yards, 250 of those on the ground, 211 passing, a couple interceptions. Declo, 376 total yards with 300 rushing. Ramsey, 4 for 10, 70 yards, but 12 carries for 146 yards, 2 touchdowns. Matthews, 160 yards, 3 touchdowns. It's a Ramsey and Matthew show in Declo, and they provided again. But boy, what a ball game!
Yeah, and so for Declo, I feel like they're kind of underrated in the 2A ranks. They're a play or 2 away from playing for the 2A championship last year. They lost to Westside in that blizzard in the semifinals, and Declo just does what they do. And as they get into conference play, I'm not sure they're going to get the types of challenges they're getting right now in the non-conference. So it's nice to see them performing well early on in this non-conference portion of the schedule for them. For Kimberly now, Scott, this is the 3rd time this year they've scored 40-plus points, yet they only have a 1-2 record to show for it. And that's where we talk about last year with Kimberly. They had the offense, they got into a lot of shootouts, but ultimately it was their defense that let them down.
Yeah, Kimberly's going to have to get some things figured out, because all the attention's given to their offensive firepower, but, you can't get stops. It's going to come back and get you. And that happened week 1 against Snake. They didn't get any stops. Second week they played Jerome, and it took them, almost 3 quarters to get it together and get some stops. They did, won that ball game, but here we go again. Another kind of porous defensive effort, but you are facing a pretty talented Declo team. Give them credit as well. But those are the teams you're going to have to beat, and those are the teams you're going to have to figure out how to come up with some stops. And, we talked about in one of the earlier, podcasts that Kimberly's weaknesses were going to be their toughness on the inside. They just needed to be a little bit tougher, a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger. And it's getting exposed right now.
Yep, for sure. Moving on to the 8-man ranks, the 1A D1 level. I thought Oakley really had a big statement on Saturday in a 52-0 shutout victory over Kendrick. Now that's a D2 program, but pretty highly regarded D2 team. They played that game in Parma. It was a neutral site game, which was kind of fun. The thing is that Oakley in that game, Scott, 52-0 looks impressive, but they didn't really put Kendrick away until late in the 3rd quarter. I think it was 16-0 at halftime. Early in the 3rd, it was still a tight game, and then Oakley kind of turned on the Jets late. But this is a Hornets team that maybe I have undervalued a little bit in my rankings, but I think Oakley looks pretty solid again.
Well, that's what good teams do. They're able to kind of hit the gas pedal. You're going to have teams, quality teams, and I know Kendrick has a big goose egg Nick on the scoreboard, but it's not a bad team. And they hung around, did what they could, but then Oakley said, "Okay, that's about enough," and put the pedal down and took off in the second half. And that's what good teams will do. Is they're able to just kind of shake it off a little bit. You see a lot of good teams that maybe kind of tighten up a little bit when an inferior team starts to hang around, and then they start to think, "Oh my gosh, we're going to lose." Oakley is just kind of full of attitude. They're just like, all right, fine, we're done here. And off they go. And that's Oakley football. And they've always been that way. So, I'm kind of curious to see how far Oakley can go with this, because, it's not their typical power football team that they've had in the past, but, they are still a really good ball club.
Yeah. It's like the lion that plays with its dinner before it devours it, right?
Exactly right.
Yeah. All right. Well, 1A D2. Let's talk about Cary. They were playing up a level at D1 Wilder. That was a game that we had on IdahoSports.com. Lather, rinse, repeat. The sun rose, the sun set. Cary won 54-0. I'm not sure there's a ton to glean from that, other than the fact that they're winning the games they're supposed to.
Yeah, it's exactly right. I mean, they had a big challenge this week internally, and Coach Kirkland's doing a great job there because he's realizing that you're going to play these games and you're probably going to win, and you're going to win by a lot. So what do you do to keep your team motivated? What are you going to do to get them to play hard? Because you look at Cary, they've got 2 shutout wins so far. They've scored 52 points, 54 points, 54 points again. They're just blowing through people. And sometimes that is one of the toughest jobs as a coach, is to keep your team grounded, keep your team kind of focused on what's ahead. And so what they did this week, they had 2 points of emphasis, and that's all they focused on. That's sustaining blocks and then an all-out pursuit to the ball carrier. Those were their number 1 and 2 things they wanted to get done this week. The score was going to take care of itself, and they focused on those 2 things, and they accomplished both. They had a 30-point second quarter, which put them up 46-0 at the half. But it's really kind of a tip of the hat to Coach Kirkland, because he's not focused right now with these games so much on the X's and O's as he is the mental side of things. When you get an experienced coach like that, yeah, he's going to tap into that, because you could get a team that kind of maybe thinks they're all that, and next thing you know, they step into the playoffs and get upset. But side note, and this is the last thing about this game, that win was the 300th win for Cary High School in the last 40 seasons. And the cool thing about it is Kirkland was the coach the entire time, because you've got dad and son who have coached Cary for the last 40 years, and they just picked up their 300th win. So that was pretty cool.
That's awesome. That's it's almost like the Pittsburgh Steelers, where they've had like 5 coaches in the history of the franchise, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is too. So, this Coach Kirkland here has been at the helm for 21 seasons. Before that, his dad for 19. So wow. It's pretty cool. Nice little milestone for the town of Cary.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a good gem you found there, Scott. That's good.
That's right. My team of crack reporters got that one for me. Found that nugget.
I assume you have a team of interns at your disposal that are doing all this research for you.
Oh, yes. I have a bevy of people that are working for me. It's amazing.
Yeah. All right. The final 1A D2 game I wanted to talk about was Castleford defeating Dietrich 32-16. Now, all along, I have thought that Castleford was a better team than Dietrich. I know other media people and coaches in different polls didn't agree with that necessarily, but I think Castleford finally proved that, hey, we're here and we're going to be here for a while this season.
And Castleford is getting tired of hearing how good they're not. They're not in the conversation year in and year out. So what you have right now is you've got a Castleford team that's playing with a chip on their shoulder. They're sick and tired of hearing how better everybody else is than they are. And you can bet that they're being told that purposely by, coaching staffs and stuff. They don't think you're anything. You know how all that goes. But it's a perfect recipe for a team like Castleford, who feels they've got something to prove, and the first big test was playing Dietrich, a team that year in and year out is just taking them behind the woodshed, really. And Castleford was having none of it, so they got some big performances. Eric Taylor, their quarterback, we've talked about him in previous podcasts, 142 yards rushing on 19 carries, 116 yards passing. Their Nunez had 64 yards and a touchdown, but defensively holding Dietrich to 16 points, that's huge. And so, Jamie Ramos, 8 tackles, 2 interceptions, 4 pass deflections, a forced fumble. Wiggins, 12 tackles, 3 of those for loss. And yeah, you hear about those things in this level of football, but you don't hear about those things against a Dietrich team. And Castleford really flexed some muscle and got some people's attention this week.
Yeah, it was really exciting to see Castleford confirm what I knew and what you knew, Scott, right? We knew Castleford was good, but everybody else now maybe getting on board.
If they only would listen to us all the time, they'd be so much smarter.
Right. Well, let's look ahead at the schedule and what's coming up this week. There's some interesting games across the board. Obviously, I think the big one you talked about already, Jerome finally going to get into conference play in the Battle of the Bridge with Twin Falls. It'll be interesting because Jerome's one of those teams. You look at they're 0-3, but they're better than that record indicates.
Yeah, I mean they are. They've pretty much survived the first 3 games without any major injuries, dings, and things like you always get. They're going to get one of their big guys back. They should get him back for Twin, Mark Larson, who was injured in the first game. But it's going to be a kind of a measuring stick for Jerome. They did play 3 tough non-conference teams, and now they're moving into conference. This is where it matters. Those first 3 games preseason, nobody cares. It's just going to be about finding out who you are, and now they got to step up to the plate and see what they've learned. So, Twin, on the other hand, they're off to a really good start. They're only lost to Pocatello, who is ranked number 1 now in the 4A media poll. So, I mean, and that's a game that they could have won. So Twin is playing some really good football. But, Twin and Jerome typically match up well against each other. And, regardless of kind of what years they're having, it's generally a pretty close game. So this should be a lot of fun.
Yep. The other big conference game is going to be Mountain Home hosting Minico. Now, Minico had a bye week last week, so they had 2 weeks to prepare. And this is where we find out if Mountain Home is legit, right? Because we talked about they're in first place in the conference right now, and they're going to get the 3 best teams according to the preseason poll all at home, and it starts here with Minico.
Yeah, and Jensen and Clark from Mountain Home are going to have to step up and make their presence known. But as a team, if you want to be considered one of the best, you got to beat the best. And right now it's Minico. And you get them at your own house, so you better get all pumped up for it, get the crowd going, whatever they've got going on in Mountain Home, because I know things are a little different up there with COVID. But, this is a huge game for Mountain Home. And it may not be one of those that they have to win, but because Minico's the better team. But if they can just put up a fight and get Minico's attention, they could actually make some noise and gain some confidence moving forward in the conference, because they still have to play Twin. They still have to play Jerome. And I think we talked about this last week. They get them both in Mountain Home.
Yep.
So this is, you talk about the big 3 in the conference. It's Minico, it's Twin, it's Jerome, and then everybody else. But, this year it might be a little different, and Mountain Home has a chance to kind of throw a wrench into those plans.
Yep, and it all starts Friday night at home against Minico. Burley is traveling to Kimberly. This will be a good test for Kimberly to see if their defense can hold somebody down. Wood River is at Filer. That should be an interesting matchup. And then you've got Shelley traveling to Canyon Ridge as well. And we talked about Canyon Ridge. They're in a tough spot. Shelley's playing really well right now, and I think Shelley's gonna have a nice time there.
Yeah, when you're a team like Canyon Ridge and you need a win, Shelley is not who you want on the schedule. Matter of fact, right now Canyon Ridge needs. I don't know who they can put on their schedule right now, but they have got to get some confidence, because right now they're just getting beat up on both sides of the football. They can't move the football offensively. They can't stop anybody defensively. And granted, we talked about it. It's a new system, new coach, and it's going to take time. But, this was an immediate need at Canyon Ridge, because they have been struggling for so long in football that they needed a shot in the arm, but they needed it quickly, and right now it's just not happening. And what you see as a result of those kinds of things is you see kids start to leave programs, because year in and year out, they're not successful. Year in and year out, they're getting their butts kicked, and so for Canyon Ridge, they have got to find something that's going to rejuvenate a program, but I don't think it's going to be Shelley.
No, but I do think they have the right guy, Coach Poole, Bubba Poole from Utah. He's played in the Pac-12. He's been a college running back. He's young. He's cool. He's hip. Canyon Ridge has a lot of students in that school, as we know. They're the biggest 4A school in the state. It's just a matter of getting those kids out on the football field. And I think with time, he will get those numbers back up to good levels. The other interesting games this week are all kind of at the 8-man level, I think. Scott, you've got a really interesting one. Lighthouse Christian is going to host North Gem. That's a D1 versus D2 matchup, but Lighthouse is 0-2 with 2 really tough games out of the gate. So I'm not sure the 0-2 record is indicative of how good Lighthouse is, but another tough matchup as North Gem comes calling.
Yeah, no kidding. And Lighthouse is one of those schools that just isn't used to losing. Going 0-3 is just not in their vernacular at Lighthouse. So you can bet this is a huge game for them. And it's going to be a good test as well. But it's kind of a must-win in a sense, for Lighthouse, just to get something in the win column and get some momentum going.
Yep, for sure. The other big game, 1A D1 level, you've got Raft River hosting Butte County. Those are 2 teams that have been in my top 5 all season. They're both in the top 5 currently as well. I guess we're going to find out if my lofty expectations for Raft River are really that high, because I think Butte County is a legit team this year as well.
Oh, there's no question about it. I mean, that could be the game of the week right there. Definitely would be in the 8-man ranks, but those are 2 good football teams. Both of them are perennial powerhouses. Year in and year out, you're talking about Butte County, you're talking about Raft River, and now they get to kind of smack each other around on the gridiron and see who's boss. So I think that's going to be a great ball game.
Yep, and then the other matchup, it's a pair of 3-0 teams as Castleford travels to Murtaugh. Now, I gotta admit, Murtaugh is not a team that I've really been able to get a handle on because their schedule hasn't been the most challenging yet, right? They played Hanson in the wagon wheel game. They beat Hagerman, which is only fielding a JV team this year. And then they beat Chalice last week, and Chalice is a team that's in a tough spot right now. So how good is Murtaugh? I don't know. They're 3-0 and they're winning the games they're supposed to.
Yeah, and it's going to be about how you're going to sell this game to Murtaugh, because anybody that's looking at schedules, anybody that knows these teams inside and out. I mean, Castleford is good. I mean, Castleford's a good ball club. Murtaugh, yeah, you said it, and who they played. But you look at Murtaugh, that they probably have a little bit of confidence, because they've seen 3 victories, and you can bet that they're not really paying attention to who it is. They're just seeing 3 wins. And that's going to allow them to play with a little bit of confidence, but they are going to have their hands full and then some this week with Castleford.
Yeah. It'll be a nice step forward for Castleford again if they can now let the target's on their back a little bit, right? They were kind of lying in the weeds these first 3 weeks. Well, now they're kind of out in the open. How do they respond when that attention is on them? That'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, it would, because, I mean, and you just said it, you have to beat the teams that you're supposed to beat. And you don't let them hang around. And this is one of those games. Forget they're both 3-0. Castleford's a better team. And Castleford needs to put Murtaugh away quickly, because that's what a good team does. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, well, it should be another fun slate of games, football and volleyball. We'll keep an eye on that Wood River Burley matchup and see how maybe Filer and Gooding and some of the other teams do over the weekend as well. And we'll come on back next week and break it all down for you again on the Magic Valley Prepcast. You can get this podcast a couple of different ways each week. You can get the audio only at IdahoSports.com. Also, wherever you download your podcasts, you can also catch the video of this each week on the IdahoSports.com YouTube channel or the Facebook page. So looking forward to another exciting weekend of action, Scott. It's going to be a good time.
Always a great time. Always.
All right. Well, for Scott Burton, I'm Brandon Baney. Thanks for tuning in to the Magic Valley Prepcast from IdahoSports.com.